Please be seated. Proceedings are resumed. I recognize the Honorable Attorney General to continue with his debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when we took the break, I was in the process of mentioning that in order to ensure, among other things, in order to ensure transparency and accountability, the bill, Madam Speaker, requires, among other things, that the Commissioner of Police shall cause to be laid before the Legislative Assembly within 3 months of the end of each year a report specifying the number of persons who have been administered with caution, the nature of the matters for which the cautions were administered, and the nature of the matters for which the caution has been administered, Madam Speaker. And
Honorable Attorney General, the member from Easton has caught my eye. Do you have a point of order? Member from Easton.
Madam Speaker, I'm bringing to your attention that we started without a quorum, and the House is not quorate, and at least it be interpreted later on that it is the norm.
Thank you, member from Easton. Can the sergeant or another concerned member please bring in some more bodies? Honorable Attorney General, the House is not quorate. Please continue.
thank you, Madam Speaker. Maybe for the records, I should start over. Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I was saying,
Thankfully that Please continue.
thank you. As I was saying, Madam Speaker, in order to ensure transparency and accountability, the bill contemplates, among other things, that, and this is clause 12, Madam Speaker, that the Commissioner of Police shall cause to be laid before the Legislative Assembly within 3 months of the end of each year a report specifying the number of persons who have been administered with a caution and the nature of the matters for which the cautions were administered. Madam Speaker, it is hoped that once this is done, it will certainly assist the public, as indeed members of this Honourable House, in appreciating and understanding how the caution regime is being administered. I think it's the fifth elected member from Georgetown mentioned that there should be further reviews or ongoing reviews and publication of the operations of the caution regime. Madam Speaker, I certainly don't see any problem with that approach. And it's something that I'm prepared to discuss with the Commissioner of Police and the DPP that they might want to consider including on their respective websites statistics, among other things, dealing with cautions being administered so that members of the public and ourselves can have a sort of a documented audit trail, so to speak, of the workings of the system. I think the member from Northside had mentioned that clause 7.2 of the bill speaks to a caution shall be recorded in the same manner as a record of the criminal conviction, and the fact that caution has been administered to a suspect shall form part of the suspect's criminal record. And he mentioned that we might want to, I hope I'm quoting him correctly, that we might want to delete the word criminal and have a record of cautions. Yeah, I suppose that. Madam Speaker, I'm thinking that that is something that we could certainly have a look at in the period leading up to committee stage. And so we will, can I say, ruminate on that and see where we end up. But it's certainly a suggestion. Certainly a suggestion that we prepare to have a look at, Madam Speaker. I must also mention, Madam Speaker, again, that the Cabinet and eventually the Legislative Assembly do have the power to amend the schedule to include other offences. And I also agree, certainly, with the suggestion that the schedule can be expanded to expressly provide for some other minor offences to be included. I am not sure whether it needs to be done as part of this exercise prior to the committee stage amendment, but, Madam Speaker, it is certainly, in my view, a commendable suggestion and one which we will take on board either as part of the committee stage amendment or an undertaking to have the schedule amended by Cabinet and eventual by Legislative Assembly after some discussions with others to ensure that we capture as many of these offences, minor offences, as possible, Madam Speaker. The question of whether or not certain issues are going to be taken into account when cautions are being administered. Madam Speaker, it is anticipated that both in developing the regulations and promulgating the policy, the guidelines, and the policy, that somewhere in there we would include provisions, Madam Speaker, that would, among other things, allow for those who administer the caution to take into account, where possible and, of course, where appropriate, the views of the victim, although I must add that in the usual course of things, although the views of the victims will be very important, understandably very important, it understandably cannot be the determinative factor as to whether or not the caution should be administered. But it is important that that be reflected. And also for those who administering the caution to take into account, sorry, Madam Speaker, the nature of any loss that might have been suffered by the victim or the damage that might have been occasioned by the offender, and to see whether in those circumstances there should be a condition for reparation or repairs or something to sort of, again, reflect the fact that the victim's position is not being ignored. And so, Madam Speaker. And someone mentioned that this exercise must be used to, I'm trying to find the word that was used, shock these young people, give them that shock into reality. So we need to make sure that the list of offenses, among other things, cover these or target these young people. Again, Madam Speaker, nothing is wrong with that. I just wish to remind honourable members, though, that we do have a particular piece of bespoke legislation that speaks to juvenile under Section 28 of the Youth Justice Law, which deals with cautions for juveniles. And that has been in operation for some time. With the rolling out of this, clearly it might well be timely to look at the workings of that and to see how we can, I think as the member from Georgetown, the fifth elected member from Georgetown mentioned, that there can be some sort of a synergy and harmony in the workings of the two regimes, regimes, Madam Speaker. And so we plan to certainly take that into account going forward. And I will have that discussion with the DPP and the Commissioner of Police as we develop the policies, the guidelines, and the procedures and standing orders to help to undergird this law. Madam Speaker, I must be very frank. I mean, it's a matter of policy for the government, but I have some reservations about the suggestion by the honourable member from North Side as to whether we should have one person, as opposed to, if I understand him correctly, a team of about 3 panel administering the cautions. I think that can understandably become quite unwieldy. But the truth is that the persons who will be administering the cautions will be themselves subject to oversight. And so it is hoped that that any sort of deviation or any issues that are arising might be caught in time and can be addressed going forward. Madam Speaker, he did mention also that he thinks that consumption of drugs that are not hard drugs should also be included in the schedule. Madam Speaker, I also agree with him on that. As I said, I think there's room, certainly, and a need to expand the schedule to expressly reflect some of the more minor offenses. I am not so sure, Madam Speaker, and I say this with the greatest respect, I'm not so sure how members could read this schedule and think that it is trying to, I think the word used, legalize the use of possession of marijuana. I don't think that has crossed anybody's thought, Madam Speaker, when the bill was being developed. So the simple answer to that has never been in the contemplation of anyone when the bill was being crafted. So the answer is no. But certainly as to whether consumption and other similar minor offenses should be included in the schedule, I'm all in agreement with having a look at that. Madam Speaker, there is an issue that was raised about what about persons who are applying for visas and whether the current construct that we are advocating here, proposing, whether that will affect them in terms of their application. Let me just clarify that the process of applying for a visa, whatever you do, whatever is required of you, is not something that is required or dictated by Cayman's legislation. So if a person is applying for a United States visa or some other visa to go somewhere, the questions to be answered and the disclosures to be made are not things that are determined by our domestic legislation. Those are matters for the legislation of the country which is issuing the visa. So, for example, it might very well be that it is United States federal law which requires whether you should disclose a caution or a conviction. Cayman Islands legislation has nothing to do with that. So if a person is applying for, if a person receives a caution and he applies for a United States visa and the application forms ask him whether he has been cautioned, it is expected, Madam Speaker, that that person filling out the application form will speak the truth. And that is not something that is dictated by Cayman Islands legislation. It's going to be something that's required by the legislation of the foreign state that is issuing the visa. So I hope I've made that quite clear, Madam Speaker. Some countries might require that you disclose whether they have been convicted or whether they have been cautioned, and it is for you, the person answering, to make that disclosure in accordance with the truth, or truthful disclosure. So, Madam Speaker, may I also just clarify that the United Kingdom has been operating a caution system for many, many years. And they do operate a sort of a somewhat different arrangement from what we are putting in place here. They have two sets of caution. They have simple caution and they have conditional cautions. Conditional cautions for the more serious offenses, and there are certain requirements dealing with how you administer a conditional caution. We have opted for a more simple procedure, Madam Speaker. And so while we did take a look, understandably, at the UK framework, what we try to do is to customize the regime in a way that is workable in the Cayman Islands without causing too much of a bureaucracy. So, the member from Georgetown also mentioned that he has some concerns about training. And it is a reasonable and valid observation. I would have thought, and I certainly would expect, that those officers who are going to be tasked, if you will, with administering cautions will be given adequate and ongoing training to ensure that the system is administered properly and in a way that is consistent with the law. So I certainly will be, again, stressing this with the Commissioner of Police and the DPP's office. But as I mentioned to you, I have seen correspondence where the Commissioner of Police very proactively has tasked one of his deputies with developing a protocol to deal with the administering of cautions as soon as the bill becomes law. So, Madam Speaker, a lot has been said about a threshold of $5,000 in respect of damage to property and matters of theft. And it is said, quite rightly, that that's not a small amount of money. $5,000 is really not an insignificant amount of money. But the $5,000 that has been reflected there is really, that has been taken, so to speak, from the penal code. So where you have a theft and the value does not exceed $5,000, that is a matter that is tried in the summary court, the magistrate's court. It's called a C offense. Can't go to the grand court. Similarly, where you have damage to property and the value does not exceed $5,000, it is a matter that has to be dealt with in the summary court, the magistrate's court. And that is the reason for the threshold, the $5,000 threshold. The point there is that from a criminal justice standpoint, it is regarded as a minor offense, so to speak. And I speak very, very deliberately when I say from a criminal justice standpoint. It is regarded as one of those low-level offenses, and so can only be dealt with in the magistrate's court. Of course, it follows that if it's 5,000 plus or 6,000 or more, then it goes to the grand court and be dealt with there, where the person might be looking at probably a stiffer sentence. So these matters are things that can be anywhere between $1 and $5,000. And I mentioned earlier that someone might go into one of these grocery shops and shoplift $12 worth of goods. And that's theft. But it's a matter that is going to be dealt with in the summary court. And clearly, that's the kind of offense that would attract a caution, or may attract a caution, assuming that it is a first offense or is one that has not been committed. He hasn't committed a similar offense in the past 3 years. Mr. I pretend that I didn't hear that. I pretend that I didn't hear that. So that is the reason for the threshold of $5,000. And so it's not that anybody is trying to play down the significance of a $5,000 damage to property, or $5,000 theft. Madam Speaker, there was some issue about addressing the underlying issues of crime. Well, I think that has been an ongoing debate for years, and I don't think there's any issue with that. As a society, we have a responsibility to look at the underlying and predisposing factors to crime. We have done that some years ago with the Yolande Ford report, and governments over the years have pursued various initiatives to address, arrest, and deal with the underlying causes of crime, Madam Speaker. A number of other things have been suggested by those who spoke on the bill, Madam Speaker, and my response to them is that most of those issues that they think should be included in the bill are matters that we are, in fact, matters that we will be looking at to include in either the regulations, the policy guidelines, and or the standing orders. It is not difficult to imagine that if we were to include all of these details in the bill itself, Madam Speaker, it has the potential of becoming very unwieldy. So a lot of these issues are matters that are going to be included in either the regulations and or the standing orders and the guidance that will be issued to those administering the cautions. So. Madam Speaker, I think this fourth elected member from Bodden Town mentioned about, well, he wondered aloud, if I might put it that way, why the issues that are being dealt with in this bill couldn't await the outcome of the report that is dealing with the police marine capability. And I just want to make sure that I didn't misunderstand him. Right. Okay. Right. So the commissioner is preparing a report. Madam Speaker, the simple answer to that is that the matters being dealt with by this bill are completely different from that which is being addressed by the Commissioner of Police in that report. He's dealing with issue of marine capabilities, search and rescue, and all these other things. What we're dealing with in this bill is something, while not mutually exclusive, is understandably different from what that report.
Sorry, Madam Speaker. Just to clarify, I was
Recognize
talking
the
about,
fourth elected member from Bodden Town.
my understanding was is that there's a report that covers the entire police service, not just the Marine. Maybe the Honorable Acting. Yes, because the new commissioner said he would do a thorough review, so I assume that is what was being referred to when I spoke to the acting deputy governor. Or the governor said that's correct, yes.
Honorable Attorney General.
Yeah, sorry if I misunderstood the member. But in any event, Madam Speaker, I still say that what this bill is seeking to achieve is, although not mutually exclusive to other issues that the police is looking at, Commissioner of Police might be looking at. This is really a piece of bespoke legislation to deal with certain type of offending and how those are disposed of outside of the usual court system. These are out-of-court disposal that we're looking at. So I suspect that whatever comes out of that police report can only be used to complement, if you will, what is it that we're attempting to do with this bill, Madam Speaker. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition mentioned a couple of things I think I mentioned. I clarify what the $5,000 threshold is all about. As I say, the maximum that has been set by the legislation to designate the offense as a C offense under the Penal Code and, of course, the CPC. And so that the matter can clearly be, people can know that it's a matter that needs to be dealt with in the summer court as opposed to the Grand Court itself. Madam Speaker, is the same thing that, same characterization or explanation I have for the offense of assault occasioning actual bodily harm. It was always, some years ago, dealt with as a category B offense, which is an either way offense, which means it could have been tried in the Grand Court and or the summer court. In more recent times, the law was amended to designate it as a C offense, which means that it can only be tried in the summer court, in the magistrate's court. So assault occasioning actual bodily harm can only now be tried in the summer court. Madam Speaker, having said that, and in response to the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, what will happen is that in developing again the regulations, the policy and the standing orders, there will be certain guidelines set down, certain markers to deal with, for example, domestic violence, Madam Speaker. So where you have an assault involving a domestic violence, there will be certain guidance given to the police and the DPP, in how you treat those offenses, in determining whether or not it is in the public interest to prosecute those offenses as opposed to administering a caution. So we certainly take on board the observation by him and seek to address it going forward with those sort of markers in mind. And so, Madam Speaker, I think I'm sorry if I missed over any of the suggestions that have been raised, but I think I've attempted to answer most of the questions, if not all, that have been put forward. And I hope those members who had some reservations are feeling much more comfortable having heard the explanations. I thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Final call. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll recognize the Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to thank all members of the House who have contributed to the debate on this important bill, and to acknowledge in particular those members, most members, all but one really, that spoke in general support of the bill, although they all pointed out various aspects of the bill that they would like to see changed or improved or additions made. Madam Speaker, the singular member who appears to fundamentally disagree with the bill is the fourth elected member for Borden Town, who spoke fluently from both sides of his mouth. On the one hand, saying he wanted and has a record, he claims, of supporting the young people and the disadvantaged. But at the same time, he couldn't support a bill which would avoid first offenders having a police record for a first offense.
Madam Speaker, on a point of order, I never said I'm not supporting the bill.
I'm delighted to hear that, Madam Speaker.
I didn't say I was either.
Members, just keep the comments through the chair so that we can have a bit of order. We've been doing pretty good all day.
Yes, Madam Speaker, it might be amusing, but it wasn't a point of order. And just bore evidence of my earlier point about the fluency with which he speaks out of both sides of his mouth. But, Madam Speaker, the Honorable Attorney General, I think, went through the bill in considerable detail and indeed examined and acknowledged a number of the points that have been made by members on the other side. I think some excellent points have been made, actually, and we are going to spend some time before we come back to the committee stage to see whether or not we can develop some amendments which meet the objectives that have been put forward, in particular by the fifth elected member from Georgetown and the member from North Side. 2 points in particular, Madam Speaker, that I really take to heart is the one that we should, instead of this going on the police record, that we should instead develop a caution register. I think that is a very powerful point, because if the objective is to avoid, and we heard it coming through in the debate that went on, the confusion in people's minds about whether caution actually is some form of a conviction or not. So I believe that there is a great deal of merit in creating a cautions register. The other point too that I think is worthy of consideration is one that was made by the member from East End. And and that is, Madam Speaker, that Madam Speaker, that having any reference or cross-reference to the criminal records spent convictions law creates a different sort of impression in people's mind and helps to further the confusion about the difference between a caution and a conviction. So what, Madam Speaker, I will propose to the Honorable Attorney General is that we write in a bespoke provision into the cautions adult bill dealing with how the caution will, shall I call it, expire, rather than having to cross-reference it into the criminal record spent convictions law. So I'm not saying those are the only 2 points, Madam Speaker, that I got from the debate that I think are very helpful. The other point is that maybe the 3-year period for the caution is too long. We will have a look at that, but that's a policy matter I have to discuss with my colleagues as well. But we are prepared to come back and discuss these in committee. But, Madam Speaker, I come back to the point which has been missed, particularly by the 4th elected member from Bordentown, but also by the Compass. He's in select company with this. The Compass's editorial for tomorrow, Madam Speaker, with your leave, I'm reading from the online copy.
Please proceed.
Says, imagine, it's entitled in the assembly exercise, Caution on Police Cautions. Imagine the following scenario. You are walking down the street with $4,900 in a shopping bag on your way to buy a used car. A man accosts you and unceremoniously punches you in the face. You stagger back and the bag goes flying. A police officer appears, and while he is detaining your assailant, you notice the shopping bag has disappeared. You turn the corner and see a man flipping through your stack of bills. The police officer detains him too. Both the assailant and the thief admit their guilt, but instead of making two arrests, the officer instead issues them a pair of written cautions and advises them not to do it again. Sound dramatic? Perhaps. But according to the language in a proposed bill now before local lawmakers, the above fiction could become reality in the Cayman Islands. And then the editorial goes on. Madam Speaker, they asked the question, sound dramatic, and the answer is yes, it is. Because the law, and we've been through this, but as often is the case with the compass, they are selective on detail and choose what they think best supports the opinion that they're putting forward. But, Madam Speaker, the law is very careful that only a police officer of the rank of inspector or above, or the DPP, can actually issue these cautions. You can't have just constables and sergeants who are arbitrarily issuing cautions. This is a process that is intended to be deliberative. It is not something that will be done on the spot. And it's not something that the arresting officer, unless he or she happens to be of the rank of inspector or above, would even have the authority to do in the first place. And Madam Speaker, to the other point, and perhaps I should read a bit more of this editorial. Maybe I won't. Yeah. But Madam Speaker, the point is that what we are trying to do, it's not just a matter of reducing the pressures on police and the court system, all of which we believe will be of considerable benefit. But the principal objective of this exercise is to avoid having so many of our own people, particularly young people, convicted and developing police records for a first relatively minor offense. That is the objective of the exercise. Madam Speaker, the fourth elected member from Bordentown spoke, wondered why I was presenting the bill, and said that the Attorney General has hitherto been the one to present these sorts of bills. Madam Speaker, I have responsibility for the prisons and rehabilitation. I presented the Criminal Records Spent Convictions Law Bill in 2016 at the last meeting of this House. So that is nothing new. And this is not a last-ditch rushed effort on our part. The member who was a member of the government up until January of last year knows that we were working on a replacement to the Rehabilitation of Offenders law. It took 3 years for us to get that done. This is another component of that overall exercise. Yes, Madam Speaker, I'm being reminded by the Honorable Attorney General that I also presented the conditional release law. So there's nothing unusual about my presentation of this particular bill, which is aimed at assisting with rehabilitation and avoiding the continued criminalization of our young people unnecessarily, young people in particular, unnecessarily. Does this fix all of the issues and problems that we have, the social issues? Of course it does not. But as I hope one day the fourth elected member from Bordentown comes to understand when he has real responsibility for these things, there is no one fix for all of the range of problems that exist in this country, and they did not all happen since we took office 3.5 years ago. We have deep systemic issues. These are but a few of the measures that this government has employed to try to assist our people, particularly young people, by not shutting down their opportunities to participate in the economy and to travel. And for the life of me, I cannot understand how the member can believe that it is better for a Caymanian young person to be prosecuted and have to fight the trial if they are not guilty, or to plead guilty, be convicted, and sentenced, than to take the option, if they are in fact guilty, of accepting a caution with no sentence and no record. And for the life of me, I don't know how he will persuade anyone.
Madam Speaker.
Honorable member, fourth elected member from Bodden Down, do you have a point of order?
Well, I don't think the Premier is being accurate in summarizing
Madam
what
Speaker.
I said.
The reason why I'm asking that because there's two members. Could you be seated, please? Thanks. There are two procedures. If there's a point of order, the member has to sit down and give way. If you're asking on a point of elucidation, it's the member's discretion whether or not to allow you to proceed. So if you could just state what the point of order is so we could move forward.
Madam
Please.
Speaker, I believe that the Honourable Premier is misleading the House because he's saying things that I didn't say.
Could you be a little more specific as to what he said?
I never said it was my preference for anybody to serve time in prison over getting a caution. I simply said that the caution process was ripe for abuse. And it was, my main argument is that it's taking the powers of the court away from the court and putting it in the hands of the police, and it could be abused. That was my main point.
Thank you. Honorable Premier.
Madam Speaker, those are matters of interpretation. And that is fine. The member can explain. There's another bill coming, he can explain it again. But the consequence, the reality is the consequence of the position he has taken is that he's saying that the court, and only the court, should have the ability to dispense justice or to deal with a person who is alleged to have committed an offense. If that is his position, it is fundamentally different to the position this government takes. This government takes the position that we, in appropriate cases where there are first offenses and there are relatively minor offenses, that the person, the suspect, as the bill describes it, should have the ability to say, I will accept a caution, please don't put me through the whole court process. We are giving the suspect, the young Caymanian person who has been caught and who has accepted their guilt for whatever it is that they have been, whatever it is has been alleged against them. We are giving them the option not to have to go to court. No one is forcing anybody to do anything. No one is wresting power from the court. Whether or not an individual is prosecuted has always been a matter for the Director of Public Prosecutions. Ultimately, the Attorney General can decide whether or not any prosecution, even if it is a private prosecution, is allowed to proceed. So, Madam Speaker, we believe that this, coupled with the other measures that we have taken over the course of the last year, the conditional release bill, conditional release law, the criminal records spent convictions law, and now the cautions.
Member from Easton, do you have a point of order?
Madam Speaker, on a point of, I would like the Premier to elucidate on that, because he said ultimately the Attorney General decides whether someone gets prosecuted criminally or in civil court. And or from a civil perspective,
He said private prosecution.
private or criminal. I hope that's not the case.
Honorable Premier.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to try to help. The- Madam Speaker, when I said a private prosecution, it is possible for someone who believes that they have been unlawfully injured to mount a private prosecution against the individual in the criminal court. But ultimately, whether or not any prosecution proceeds is a matter, I said the AG, that was under the old constitution. Under the current constitution, it's the DPP. It's the DPP. But the decision of whether or not a prosecution goes ahead is, as I said, it's ultimately a matter for the Director of Public Prosecutions. So, Madam Speaker, as I started to say, that the raft of legislation that we have introduced, the conditional release law, the criminal record spent convictions law, and now the cautions adult law, are all part and parcel of the government's policy at giving people who have committed offenses but who have or are prepared to live a crime-free life another chance at being able to participate fully in this economy, and to the extent possible to allow them the freedom to travel overseas that they hitherto had enjoyed before they wound up with a conviction. With the caution, which does not go on the police record, we avoid the conviction in the first place for those who have committed a first offense, which is with respect to a relatively minor crime. And so, Madam Speaker, I believe with what the Honorable Attorney General has said in answer to the many points, many of them useful, put forward by some members of the opposition, and what I've said, that the House, and I hope the broader public, has a clearer and better understanding of what it is that the government is seeking to achieve and what the effect of this law, once it is passed, is likely to be. We will, as I said, have, I think, considerable further debate in committee, because some of the proposals that have been put forward by my friends on the other side, I think colleagues on the other side, members on the other side, will be, I think, quite useful and will make the final law a much better piece of legislation than the draft that we have brought to the House. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled The Cautions Adult Bill 2017 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. I believe the ayes have it. Accordingly, the Cautions Adults Bill 2017 has been given a second reading. Honorable Premier, can we have a motion for the adjournment, please?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move the adjournment of this House until tomorrow, Thursday, 23rd February at 10 a.m.
The question is that the Honorable House be adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. All those in favor, please say aye. Against, no. The ayes have it. The House now stand adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.